Okay, so again, I'm sorry, it's really bright out here, so it's hard for me to see my phone. My phone looks dark in comparison to the sunlight. But something else I wanted to talk about along the lines of why we chose to preserve eggs, of all things, is because eggs are known to be extremely nutrient dense. And I know that saying that will cause discomfort for people who may be vegan or strict vegetarian. And, I just wanted to say Victor and I were both vegan and vegetarian for a long time, years and years. And eventually I started having health issues, which I partially attribute to that diet. And in my opinion, a lot of the lies that were being spread about fruits and vegetables being the most nutrient dense things on the planet, looking at scientific research, that's not true. Probably the most nutrient dense food is liver. Not the most pleasant thing to eat, but we as Drakonians and as people who love science believe in doing things from like an ancient traditions or a nourishing traditions perspective at this point. And so nourishing foods were a lot of things that were warm and like cooked in broth and slow cooked for a long time. And they tended to involve meats and vegetables that, of course, were locally grown by tribes and communities. And I know now we live in this world that's very much about like kale and acai berries and mangosteen and matcha and whatever the next superfood herb or whatever is going to be. And all those things are great. I like those things. We buy those things. We're supportive of those things. But I know that there are a lot of people who have moral issues with eating meat, eggs, dairy. And I used to be one of those people. And to some extent, I still am. I don't think I could butcher an animal if I had to. I mean, maybe if my kids were starving, maybe I could then. But it's not something I know how to do. And it's not something I particularly would like to know how to do. And of course, taking life from something is not, would not be my favorite thing to do at all. But we live in a time where industry has really destroyed our farming system, at least here in the United States, and our soil is extremely depleted. Fruits and vegetables are not the highest source of many nutrients. They are of some, maybe of some nutrients, but particularly things that are fat soluble, like vitamin A, vitamin K, things like that. Things that a lot of people are deficient in. Magnesium, these are things that often come from animal sources, and animal sources, in my opinion, from the research I have read from people like Lily Nichols and my friend Aubrey Phelps, who is a pre and postnatal nutritionist. Animal sources retain a lot more minerals than things like grains and many fruits and vegetables. If you're familiar with Dr. Mark Hyman, he talks about how broccoli today has like a quarter or a half of the nutrients it had 50 years ago. Like a stalk of broccoli or a head of broccoli. I mean, that's significant. And I used to be very, very zealous when I was vegan. And I was like, I would rather die than eat an animal. If I become sick from it, oh well. But I was talking some junk, because that is not accurate. I don't relish taking anything's life. I don't eat a ton of meat. But I also think that there is a big difference between sustainable agriculture and local farmers and getting your sources from those types of people who are close with their land, close with their animals, versus factory farms. And some people may not agree. That's fine. I think factory farming is terrible. I'm absolutely against it. It's caused so many problems ecologically here in the United States. And there are huge moral concerns that come with that. They're definitely, not moral at all. They're extremely inhumane. Saying that that type of meat is the exact same as an animal that has lived a relatively full life in the way that it is meant to, grazing on grass, having freedom, being allowed to have a family. I'm not saying, one day it gets killed for meat and that's fine, and I'm sure it's not upset about that. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that's different than a lot of the horror stories that I've read and seen about from factory farms. And I have some beef, honestly, with PETA, that organization. They printed a lot of things back in the early 2000s that had me thinking I didn't need to be worried about my nutrition, as long as I ate the way that they talked about in their pamphlets. And now I see that I have so many health things going on that, could have partial roots from how depleted I likely was. I'm not blaming them entirely for that, but I don't think they really had great research to back up what they were claiming. Because, or maybe they did, but I don't know. It just seems totally false. A lot of the stuff I read was like, there's plenty of nutrients and fruits and vegetables, and as long as you eat like tofu, beans, and nut butters, you're going to be fine, and you'll actually have more minerals than the average American, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know. I had a hard time retaining muscle mass. I was thinner, I'll give you that. But that has more to do, I think, with stress and other things. And Victor felt the same way. Like, he felt great while he was vegan. And then after a certain amount of time, he just felt depleted. And like, he absolutely needed red meat specifically. And interestingly, even though red meat was demonized for a long time, since the 70s or 80s, it's going to give you heart disease and it's going to do all these terrible things. It's extremely rich in certain nutrients, like zinc, for example. People take extra zinc sometimes when they have a virus or when they're sick. Beef is very rich in that. I think chicken is also rich in zinc. And when you're a vegetarian or vegan, you tend to have higher levels of copper and lower levels of zinc. And combined with other possible factors, that can actually lead to copper toxicity. I'm pretty sure that happened for me when I had a copper IUD. And I just naturally, I wasn't eating a lot of meat, and my doctors weren't very helpful when I was having all this huge array of health symptoms. And I started, doing like a deep dive on the internet because I wasn't getting help from anywhere, and I was really ill. And I started to find blogs where women were talking about their copper IUDs giving them, this toxic response. And I had mine removed shortly after that, and I did get somewhat better. But I think years and years of eating foods that were high in copper and lower in zinc also really kind of set me up to have that be a more extreme case than it needed to be. My opinion, I'm not a doctor. Okay, I'm not telling you how to eat. I'm telling you, our viewers, why we as Drakonians value things like grass-fed meats, grass-fed cows, raw milk, things that are somewhat controversial, and a lot of people don't eat that way today or think that those things are dangerous. And under the wrong conditions, they can be dangerous, sure. But I mean, I would argue there's tons of food recalls all the time on processed food, frozen food, canned food. So I don't know how there's this public view of, natural food that was consumed by humans in a certain way for hundreds, at least, if not many thousands of years, is crazily dangerous. Don't eat it. But like the salad mix that has salmonella on it is totally cool. It's from a Draconian perspective, it's interesting to see how the public has really been kind of brainwashed by a lot of these large organizations. I'm not going to name any because I feel like that could lead to problems. And like I said, when I called out PETA, that was my personal opinion. I don't have evidence that they falsified studies or anything like that. I just felt very misled, and I wish I had taken other opinions into account and other research into account before deciding that I was going to be a vegetarian for nearly 10 years, and then having children, which also depletes your mineral reserves. I was a vegetarian completely for moral reasons. I was against the idea of killing animals, and I still don't love the idea. It's not great. But that's why I was a vegetarian. It wasn't like, I don't know, sometimes people have health reasons or whatever. I became a vegetarian strictly because I thought that killing animals to eat them was wrong. And I thought we did not need them, that the human physiology was not a necessary part of the diet. And when I say necessary, I'm not saying, if you don't eat meat, you're going to die in a year or something. That, I'm not saying anything crazy like that. I think we all know that's not true. There's plenty of people who haven't eaten meat for a long time, and they're alive. Are they at their optimum health eating, raw sprouted foods and likely a fairly high carbohydrate diet and things like that? I don't know. But I also know that a lot of people who eat that way, I know a lot of them have health issues in my personal sphere anyway. And I'm not making any claims that eating, nourishing tradition, ancestral type food will cure people of disease. But I do think that it provides more benefits in general and maybe a better bolstering for the body than a lot of common commercial foods today, especially because we have such high levels of just toxic chemicals everywhere. Pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, heavy metals. It's really tragic. And the vision of Drakkonia is that at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, those things will start to fade out of the Earth's ecology, at the very least in certain sections of the Earth. Of course, there are undeveloped nations that don't have these problems, right? They may get some in their water or some in the air from neighboring areas, but like the Hunza people, for example, I believe they're near Israel. They live in general to be about 150 years old. They've never touched glyphosate, which every American is loaded with glyphosate because of our fields. And, if you eat wheat, wheat is usually sprayed with glyphosate. Corn, there's a ton of things that are sprayed with that. Supposedly it is in certain medical treatments, and it disrupts gut function and immune function. And it's somewhat toxic. And carcinogenic. And those aren't just my words, even large governing bodies have said that. And we've been using this now for decades and decades and decades. There are people on the planet who have never been exposed to that substance, or have been exposed at a level that is so much smaller than the average American or even Canadian. Many countries, have used that for a long time. I give kudos to some of the countries in Europe and Africa that have absolutely either never touched it or have banned it once finding out about its side effects. And it, like I said, from a draconian perspective, we seek to have the cleanest possible air, water, and soil to produce the healthiest food and the healthiest people. I have seen so many people. Often it's the same people that are vegetarian these days. I've seen so many people talking about not needing to do detoxes or special dietary protocols or anything because we have a liver and kidneys, and that's all the detox we need. And that's just so incorrect. The amount of things that the average person today or child today is exposed to is hundreds and hundreds of times more than the toxins that, say, our great-grandmothers were exposed to in childhood. And you might think they had lead paint and people worked in coal mines and steel. Yes, that's true. The Industrial Revolution came and pollution was a major problem, and we're still feeling the effects from that. But we are now living with pollution that's been happening a long enough time now that it's not just about what's being released today. It's what was released last year, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago. Those things, not all of them have been filtered out by this planet or by the people that are living here. And I think functional medicine doctors, one I follow that's local to us is Emily Sadri. She's a functional medicine gynecologist. And I like her a lot, and she reposts a lot from like Mark Hyman and Sarah Gottfried and Terry Walls and a lot of the other like big functional medicine people that are out there in the world with books and programs and podcasts and stuff. You know, the Western medical system is not really keeping track of toxins in the body in the same way that functional medicine doctors are. They're looking for things like environmental toxins, mycotoxins, Epstein-Barr virus, Bartonella, and all these other things that affect human health that traditional hospitals are not even paying attention to. So I feel like I'm kind of talking about a lot of things at once, but again, you know, the vision for the Draconian micronation is that we can return to a state of homeostasis on this planet. Humans, animals, nature, living in balance with each other. Not necessarily by completely cutting out technology. That's not necessary. But by purposefully and intentionally using technology and growing practices and medicine, having everything with an intention of being in balance with one another. The same way that, you know, I assume animals do when they're in the wild. Humans are just high-functioning animals who are wiping themselves out by doing the wrong things. And I think that even though it may sound like a wildly unattainable goal at this point, that's still the vision. And at the very least, we can make differences where we are locally. You know, for example, we don't spray our yard. You know, a lot of our neighbors, I'm sure, wish we did. We don't spray the dandelions. We don't spray the clover. We look at all those things as medicine. And here in the Midwest, that's a lot of what we have is like dandelions, clover, stinging nettle, little plantain. Trying to think of what else grows in our yard. I think those are the main ones. And again, we see those things as medicine. We don't spray them. We mow our lawn because we live in a city where we have to. Well, Victor mows the lawn. I don't actually mow the lawn. I do some of the picking of the medicinal herbs that grow. But the more like-minded people that there are, and then if those people can get together and be in the same area, we can start making a bigger impact on not only ourselves and our communities, but on the ecology around us. And I hope that that is something that you believe in as someone who's watching this video. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions about the water glassing process, please go ahead and leave them below. I will be sure to show you some future videos of some things that we've preserved. An example of what may be coming soon are things like homemade kefir, homemade yogurt, how to make candles out of Crisco that last a really long time in the event of an emergency. Things of that nature. We have a very small prepper pantry in case of disasters, and we actually had a power outage here for like 5 or 6 hours the other night. And it was right around dinner time, so the kids were hungry, and it was not pleasant. But anyway, thank you for spending time with me today, and I hope you're well.